Okay, welcome everybody to the next in the series of podcasts with frontline practitioners. I'm joined by three very capable school business leaders from across our system, and I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves, talk about their particular setting, and then we'll get into the substantive debate. So I'll start with Leslie, please.
Hi, I'm Leslie Burton, a business manager for a large primary in Bradford, part of a diocesan multi-academy trust.
Thank you. Russell.
I'm Russell Dalton. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Worcester Diocese Multi-Academy Trust. We have 14 schools. I also chair our local school business management group in Worcestershire.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Jones. I'm school business manager of a large secondary school, which is part of a multi-academy trust in Surrey.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the theme of today's conversation is going to be free school meals. Hurrah! And I'm sure there will be lots to discuss, lots of opinion. And, you know, I think the most important thing beyond whatever our particular disquiet is how it's affecting children and families. I think that's really important to pick up on as well. Given that, and I'm tracking back now to a couple of weeks ago, some may say it's a bit more than that now. I think when this whole thing started, we had the ambiguity in the first instance over whether free school meals were going to be introduced over the Easter period, and a last minute decision suggested that that was the right thing to do, and then we all were at first introduced to this company that we'd never heard before called Eden Red, a French company that apparently was on a supply list with the department, and the rest is history. In no particular order, I happily just jump in whenever you want to. How would you characterise your experience of, first of all, the free school meal initiative, and then in particular your own experience of trying to deliver those free school meals for children?
Go.
I suppose I'll just jump in here with saying that I think we welcomed the fact that there was going to be a national initiative, because there were so many schools doing so many different things that actually it standardized it. But what I found quite interesting was the fact that most of colleagues I've spoken to nationally were predominantly on one of the systems, and I think the main one was WAND. I don't think I've found a school yet that was on Eden Red prior to this happening. So it did strike as quite a strange decision to move everybody off a current system they were using to a totally new one, especially when parents potentially had just got used to using the system that the schools had set up. And these are the most vulnerable of our pupils, which I'm really worried about as well. So some of those parents might struggle with literacy, they might struggle with IT skills, and the school spent quite a lot of time on getting those parents engaged and receiving the vouchers in the first instance from the schools. So then there seemed to be a significant lag afterwards with them receiving the Eden Red vouchers, which caused quite a lot of consternation, I have to say.
Yeah, and I think all of the comments that you're making there, Russell, are both valid and will resonate with many practitioners. So Sarah, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think the start of the process was quite challenging, in that everybody, as Russell said, was doing something completely different, because at the time there was no clarity from government that we could actually provide anything. So we were highlighting it as an issue that we needed to get this money out to the students. So, I mean, some schools set up gift cards with supermarkets, others set up food hampers. Everybody was trying to do their own thing. And I think we all welcomed it when it was said that there was something consistent that was going to be made available. But then that has been complicated again with the lack of consistency in how we're going to get the money back, or would it be full, you know, these would be paid for by government, but these wouldn't, but you could still do them. So that has been kind of opaque. I agree the difficulty with getting onto parents using different platforms, that is challenging, particularly as these families are the ones that won't be having many devices at home. So it's quite likely that the one device in the house that needed to be used for online learning is being used to queue to get these vouchers, and I think that's an issue. And with Wand, there is a slightly side issue of GDPR. Now Wand, obviously because it front ends with SIMS, and most of the schools will have a GDPR arrangement in place with them before that. There's been no clarification about how that fits with Edenred, because I'm fairly sure I haven't got a GDPR relationship with them. So it's felt a bit piecemeal, as ever. Feels like we're driving the bus, but then every now and then somebody skips up and says, oh, we'll do this bit now, and then it fails spectacularly. The system is getting better, but it is not perfect. We have been having conversations today where school business managers yet again are in the waiting room for vouchers, and we are 7 weeks in.
Is that right? 7 weeks now, is it?
I think so.
So I talked about a couple of weeks, because that's as far back as my memory goes at the moment, and it's actually been 7 weeks. So there you go. How time flies. Yeah, no, that's quite remarkable. Thank you, Sarah. And Leslie, what are your reflections on the?
We are very different, because when we first started, we started with packed lunches, which we delivered. We are very lucky. We have 2 of our own minibuses and a fabulous site manager and his wife who live on site, and we're quite happy to deliver. So when the Edenred scheme came into force, the head and I spoke about it. We decided to carry on. We got an on-site catering team who were happy to continue making the packed lunches, the site team happy to deliver, and we were in was it 3 or 4 weeks, 2 or 3 at the very least, where the children and the families had been used to this. So they'd been used to the deliveries. But the thing that was very pertinent to us was these deliveries act as a welfare check. It's not just the butty in a bag, we call it, but it's not just that. The children wait in the windows. The families know that when our staff knock on the door, they signal and acknowledge through the window, so we know the families are all right. But most importantly, the children who the bottom have fallen out of their world, they don't know what's happening, where the people they, rely on to be looked after have gone. They can still see us there. They know that we're there waiting for them whenever this finishes. And that's been massive to us. Our demographics are very challenging. We live in a very deprived area. And what we were worried about with the vouchers they would become currency on the estate. People would sell them to one another, knowing that they could spend them on what they wanted. So that's another one of our points that we decided to keep going. We are the only school in our trust that are still delivering meals. Everyone has gone with the vouchers, but it worked for us. But most importantly, it worked for our children, and that's why we've carried on.
Can I just ask a question there? Because presumably you're not going to get that money back from the department unless you go into deficit reserves?
Yeah, exactly. But it was just, we made the decision because we were getting the free school money in. This is what we thought. We still should be providing that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, I think there's some really important points that you raised, and I do want to come back on to the subject of reimbursement, but we'll visit that in a second. I'm intrigued that your trust have taken a decision with some of the schools, or the majority, and that you're kind of an outlier, and that you've been able to to develop your own strategy for delivering food to local pupils. How have you reconciled that with your central team? So how have you been allowed to move outside of Eden Red and still continue to deliver through the packed lunch approach that you committed to?
Our trust is very good with own school autonomy. If it's working and we can justify it, which we could, we've got loads of letters, thank you letters, messages from parents saying how important it is. So those alone prove to the trust that this was a system that was working. They are very well aware of our demographics and knew that that might be an issue. So because of that, they were happy for us to run while it was working, and we could provide the staffing, the manpower, and the actual physical meals.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And quite unique, I have to say, in its own way. Some trusts are not allowing that level of autonomy, so that's very insightful. So just coming on to the reimbursement issue, and I think there are a couple of angles here. One is, Leslie, you've taken the steps to go in that direction. It sounds like you've done that irrespective of the potential losses. So you said that's the priority, and we'll bear the losses if we have to, but we might not have to. And then there's, that's the strategy you've taken, but clearly there's been, if you like, ambiguity over what's permitted and what's not permitted, and that ambiguity has permeated across the system and not been at all helpful. So I think most of us reluctantly would accept that Eden Red has fallen way short of what it could deliver, but the ambiguity on top of that has just made things really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody want to sort of jump in on that?
I think that the issue that schools had was because of the failures in the first instance of Eden Red, and the fact that some of these vulnerable families were not receiving any money potentially for 2 to 3 weeks. They had placed the order with Eden Red, and they thought, we've got to get something out to these schools. So they went to their own expense of actually doubling up on orders and probably going to Wand or their other provider to make sure that those families did have the vouchers straight away. So I don't find it comfortable that schools are being penalised when they are trying to do the best for their vulnerable pupils, especially given the fact that they're doing this because of the failures of a system that was put in place. They should not be penalised because of that.
Yes, I agree with you there, Russell, because it feels like we have been penalised for doing the morally right thing for our children. And that is where that decision came from. It was the moral thing to do for them.
I fully accept that where you have got sufficient capacity in your in-year to pay for things that you can. So if you need to put in additional IT, you need to buy additional subscriptions, things like that to deliver your online teaching. I think if you can, you should. However, this feels like a separate issue to me. It feels like, stop, if we can't feed those children, it doesn't matter what we do technology wise or teaching wise. Could be the best teacher in the world. If you're hungry, you're not going to access that lesson. So and it is not our fault that the one system, that the Eden Red system isn't working. It is not for lack of trying. So it feels like this is one that the government have said that they would pay for it. They should pay for full free school meals, full stop, to a value of £15 per child per week, full stop.
And I think for what it's worth, and this is pure speculation on my part, and just trying to take the mood music, is I think ministers are now minded to reflect on that, and I'm hoping that we'll see. I hope they reach a sensible determination on this, and that they recognise that in a world where, and a situation where the system that they procured has fallen way short of what it should have delivered, then the exceptional circumstances aren't that exceptional anymore. They're the normal. So the fact that people are having to go elsewhere in high numbers in order to feed children, I think again they're going to have to reflect very hard on whether or not it's appropriate to be further penalising, disadvantaging, whichever language you want to use. At the end of the day, it all amounts to the same thing, doesn't it? If you're taking away surpluses that have been built up through careful financial management, it doesn't feel particularly even-handed. And I think if the Edenred scheme was working seamlessly, then there would be less of an argument to say, well, why have you gone elsewhere? But in a situation where it's falling way short of, even close to that, then yes, I think, and I think there's mounting pressure. I mean, again, to take this in the spirit in which I'm saying it, because it's pure speculation, but I think the pressure is mounting, and I think that they are going to, the ministers that is, are going to have to come back to the education system with education sector with a response which is absolutely meeting the growing frustrations that school leaders are suffering. So we will see.
I think as well, sorry.
Just carry on, Leslie, sorry, go on.
Sorry, feeding on from what Sarah mentioned as well, I think there's further implications, because if the children are hungry, there are going to be behavioural issues, which will then increase the tensions in the family, increasing the domestic violence that we've seen shoot up the scale as it is. So there is an indirect safeguarding implication as well to this, especially in my setting, because this is what we are up against. We have children sometimes eating from bins because they are that hungry. They don't eat unless they're with us. Which is tragic, and we absolutely can't have we can't have that, can we? I mean, absolutely not. And I think this is where I think we've not the sector, but perhaps those that are making the decisions have perhaps lost a sense of perspective on this. So it might seem like a small thing that an IT system isn't working very well and it's causing administrative headaches to people. And I think possibly the strategy was, well, we can tolerate the administrative frustration, but the ripple effects beyond it to society are much greater than the administrative frustration. And the administrative frustration is not to be, we shouldn't overlook that either, because people who are working already ridiculously long days don't need that added stress. So I mean, we certainly need more clarity, and what we would really like, I think, is what I'm hearing from colleagues on the call is not so much clarity on the criteria, but actually change the criteria so it isn't conditional on whether or not you've got an in-year surplus. Yeah.
Well, I think also, Stephen, there are some mixed messages, and even today I had an email from a business manager in one of the schools who said that they'd contacted the DFE, and the DFE had said to them, "Don't worry, just claim for it, and you'll be paid it." Now that actually isn't the case if you went by what the guidance states. No. So I think there are too many confused communications coming out on whether schools will or won't be eligible to claim, and more importantly, to receive the funding.
Yeah. So on that, just for what it's worth, I took the trouble to call one of the senior officials, knowing that I was going to have this conversation today, and said there remains this ambiguity, and I said I need clarity on the following things, and I asked firstly whether it was indeed correct that any school projecting an in-year surplus would have whatever that surplus was deducted from any claim they made. That was the first question, and they said that is the case. And I said to them in response to that, well, I have heard that some schools with surpluses have successfully approached the DFE and been told that even though they're running a surplus, they'll get refunded. They said, well, however that communication took place, that isn't the current guidance. The guidance is if you're projecting a surplus, an in-year surplus, then that will be deducted first before any reimbursement takes place. Notwithstanding that, if you move outside of Edenred, you will absolutely be refunded if you don't have a surplus. So that was the second point of clarification. And then the third question I asked was, is the surplus an aggregated surplus at a trust level, or is it a local surplus in the local school environment? And the response to that was the trust can choose. So they can choose to declare individual schools, or they can choose the aggregated position.
But I thought the latest guidance said it was MAT reserves.
No. And again, this is so whether the wording in the background needs to be amended. The position that I sought today is the position, and if the language that's out there is ambiguous or out of date or inconsistent with what I just said, then we need to call that out.
Because the other issue is as well, there's a cap, isn't there, on what you can claim. So that is going to have relevance if you're claiming as a MAT or claiming as a school.
That's right. Yeah. But the cap will apply to. So if you're applying the rules for an individual school, then the cap will be the individual school cap. So the numbers in that individual school will apply for that criteria. If you're aggregating, then obviously the amount of money you can claim is greater, but it's the surplus position across the MAT that will come into effect at that point.
And I think as well, the argument that schools have effectively had the money for free school meals, because that was part of it, wasn't it? That schools have received that money.
Yeah.
And we're also being told to use that money to help to pay for the catering under the PPN 20.
Yeah.
So there's another argument, therefore, to say that the FSM should be all paid for, because otherwise we're paying for something twice out of something we receive one funding for once.
Yeah, and I think to be fair to the department on that one is that they were very comfortable. They were very comfortable with you receiving free school meal funding. You know, the historic arrangements plus whatever you need to do going forward, but only when you met the criteria that was set out for those three areas of funding, which I understand eliminates quite a lot of schools if they're projecting an in-year surplus. But yeah, I mean, I think it's give on the one hand and take away on the other, isn't it? And in a crisis, the jiggery pokery is just not helpful. We just need absolute clarity.
I think the one thing that also that isn't taken into account, and you did touch on it, and you mentioned the administrative burden. I want to call it the human cost to this. You've got head teachers, you've got business managers, you've got administrators who might be getting up at all times of the day and night to try and access the system because it's not accessible during the normal working day. Now, these people are already under an immense pressure to ensure that their environments are safe for the children that they're looking after, that their staff are actually still motivated, are comfortable to go in, especially given the fact that they're having to do this over holidays and bank holidays and things like that. And that, it just feels like a double whammy that you're having to put up with a system that is that's not fit for purpose at the moment, and then you also got the human cost on top of it as well, and then to be told you're not going to be reimbursed because you've got an in-year surplus, and that in-year surplus might have been planned to be used for something else down the line. We've got school. We've got SRMAs out there at the moment who are looking at schools for the best way that they spend their money. Maybe they should be focused on something else that the DFE might have gone out and done, which wasn't necessarily the best use of taxpayers' money.
Yeah, and I think that you make a good point there. I mean, all of the things that you've said, Russell, you can't argue with. But I think you make your final point about SRMA deployment and using those SRMAs not to be looking for so-called efficiencies or savings, but actually be to providing some advice for schools in the coming weeks and months. And I think that is where the focus is going to turn for SRMA, which we welcome, because I think right now that's where all the energy needs to go. I'm just interested in all of your views on if and when we return to normality. I mean, that's so far away, it's not even worth talking about. But if at some point in the not too distant future we see schools start to reopen in a phased way, how do you think that will impact on free school meals? Because you could envisage a scenario where half your school population are still out and half your population are back in school. So you'll be providing those free school meals in an almost hybrid way. So you'll be providing free school meals physically to children, and then you'll be doing the voucher scheme as well. So that I'm interested in. I don't know whether you've thought about that as.
I was talking to my team about that actually today.
Right.
And we were saying, obviously, if the school opens in some kind of limited capacity, we will have to have some kind of limited catering available. Sure. So there will be increased administrative burden, because we will have to take out those pupils who are actually there, who are free school meals, from the scheme. So we're going to have to go back to an almost, because whilst they were saying to upload as a block where you can, we'll have to go back to a weekly system. So that will require Edenred to be able to cope with that increased demand, which we already know they can't. And it will increase pressure on admin work. One thing that I think we've kind of alluded to but haven't expressly mentioned, by the way, is parental confidence in the schools. It's so important right now that we have that, and the voucher system has done a cracking job of undermining that.
Right.
We have heard stories of violence where people are not getting their vouchers and are increasingly frustrated. You've had parents who just can't access the system and are questioning that they have no food, so they're being referred to food banks, and it feels somewhat futile to be saying to them, it's not me, it's the voucher system.
Of course. And so I presume that the Edenred debacle is not on the parents' radar. What they see is school leaders, school administrators not being able to give them the vouchers, and that so school leaders are taking the brunt of the frustration from parents. Is that right?
Parents have been told that they're entitled to it.
Of course.
They're not then getting it. So you can. If it was me, I would be exactly the same.
Sure.
Well, equally, that they're saying, well, you had a system that worked. Why don't you just move back to that if it worked previously? So that they to be fair, they don't care about the school's economics. All they're worried about is getting those vouchers and their particular setting.
Understandably, yeah.
And again, just going back to the human bit, we've already heard off Leslie about the fact that they're delivering those. Some of these vouchers are having to be hand delivered as well, because these parents haven't got the IT or whatever. So there's a lot of administration, a lot of time and effort goes into this, and the schools are putting themselves out to do this because it's for their most vulnerable. And I just don't, I think I'm sounding like a broken record. I just think that side isn't being considered in the slightest.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to be heard.
If you open partially, the admin burden's going to go up, and the chances of it's going to complicate things for parents in a system that's already complicated, and they're already feeling that they don't understand it. So it's going to make it worse.
I do wonder also if there's a precedent now being set about providing these vouchers over holiday periods. What is going to happen when normality, whatever that means, comes back? Is there now an expectation that free school meals are actually, a voucher will be provided in holiday times as well as in normal term times. We were discussing at our meeting this morning about the summer holidays, and most of my schools are small primary schools, so who's going to administer this over the summer holidays if this does continue to go on, because most of the staff are term time only. We've got to consider their time off as well. We can't just assume that they're going to be doing it. So if it is that they're going to be provided over school holidays moving forward, we need a robust system that will allow for longer term ordering that will work.
Yeah, I suspect that, as I said at the start of the call, I suspect that there's going to be a full review of all of this, and there needs to be, and I'm hoping that will be part of the discussions, which I think will start to really take pace, start to move at pace in terms of the reopening schedule. I'm interested also, presumably during this whole period of of lockdown, parents have lost jobs. Families are more vulnerable than they were before. Many families that weren't eligible for free school meals now are eligible for free school meals. I don't know how that's being tracked and how that's coming through in terms of the vouchers and the services that you've got to provide to additional families. How's that all working?
So if we get eligibility notification, I'm manually uploading for additional vouchers to go out straight away. I think for ones that we're worried about, we're referring to the food bank straight away and helping with processing of paperwork, whatever we can. But if we think there is a need, we will issue something we'll do it out of voluntary funds until we can confirm.
Yeah. And just on that, Sarah, so the eligibility process, presumably there's a lag. So, if you're suddenly eligible for benefits that in a way that you weren't before, you inform the authorities, you make the relevant claims, and then presumably that doesn't raise a flag for you until some period afterwards.
Well, we're really lucky. We've got an amazing pastoral team, so we do know the people it's likely to affect, and we're regular contacts, and the year group heads are in contact with people, and we're sending out regular comms to say if your circumstances change, get in touch. And I think that's the main thing. We're trying to be as open and talk to us as we can.
And I think that's key. That's key, is the communication from the schools to the parents. Constantly reminding them about if their circumstances change, and that's where we've found that's where we've had the biggest uptake is the reminding them that if they have changed, then they might be eligible for something.
Yeah, and I think it shows that knowing your school, really knowing it, not just having an overview, is far more important in these times than it has been ever before. And it's showing how important again our role is by making sure we're on top of that and able to access this. Really important.
And no system, no database can do that for you on its own. So this is I'm going to ask you for some feedback, which I recognise will at best be anecdotal because you probably don't collect this data formally, but I'm just trying to get a picture of the impact. Do you know the number of families which have been affected to the extent that it has meant they've gone without food, or they've really struggled as a direct consequence of not being able to access the vouchers? Have you got any metrics around that at all that I can try and extract from your?
I don't personally, but I can, because that would go to the homeschool link worker, and she would know through referrals to the food bank.
Right. There's still a school in that I got emailed from this morning. It's not in my trust, but it's in Worcestershire, they still have not received their initial email to set them up to use Edenred. They've contacted the DFE. The DFE have told them just to contact Edenred directly. When they try and contact Edenred, they can't get through to anyone. So they're the school that have been told, oh, don't worry, you'll get reimbursed for this anyway. So just go and use your own.
The book.
Yeah.
So what is the plan B for that school? So Edenred aren't delivering, Edenred aren't responding, so that this particular school has not been able to issue vouchers. So but they've not issued Edenred vouchers, so they've had to, at their own expense, go to Wand and issue vouchers via Wand. So in that scenario, the families or the children, most importantly, have been fed, but the school is financially exposed with no guarantee that they'll ever get any of that money back. Is that the position?
And the school and the children are being fed because of that school's high morals and their desire to look after their children. Yeah. Whereas some schools would have just let that coast until the documents were through. Yeah. Oh dear.
The frustrations on emails and telephone calls that I've received over the last few weeks, or it's you can see where it's cascading down to, because the parents are sort of onto the schools are frustrated because they can't do anything, so they're contacting us at the centre to say, well, you must be able to do something, go away and sort. And it is the sentiment was good, the actual delivery has been far from even good.
Well,
Stephen, can I just ask was there ever any reason why the allowance wasn't added to universal credit? Or is that a possibility?
I think there are many things that, in retrospect, that could have been done differently, and I think the review will start to talk about how we fix this very broken problem.
I suppose isn't it, if it was added to universal credit, that actually it might not be going to what it could be spent on. At least with a supermarket voucher, it's got to be spent in that supermarket.
That could have been one of the considerations, and I think even the voucher scheme, to an extent, has its risks, because you go to a supermarket and supermarkets nowadays don't just sell food, do they? They sell pretty much everything, and I'm not suggesting this happens, but it's a possibility. Someone who's quite desperate goes in, uses the voucher, buys a radio, sells it for something less than desirable. So there are all these possibilities. I do think it's quite difficult to mitigate against that in a time of crisis, and particularly if you're not actually delivering the food to children, it's a tough one. But whatever we say about the decisions that were made, Edenred has been woefully inadequate, and the workarounds have equally not met the needs of the education community. So we've got to the sector, department officials and ministers ultimately have got to reflect back on the last 7 weeks and think, this can't happen again. How do we make sure that going forward things are much better? And still having those problems with Edenred 7 weeks out is just are we flogging a dead horse? Possibly. So I think a different approach probably needs to be considered at this point.
I think one of the
I think about buying adding it to universal credit, and it could be spent on something different. I think if we're asking the country to behave as grown-ups, I think giving a voucher that can be spent in a supermarket, it's not up to us to restrict what we spend it on. We're asking people to act as grown-ups. We should treat them like grown-ups. And I do believe the majority of people will be wanting to buy food for their children.
That would also get around the system, the issue with if you are restricted to staying in your house because of underlying conditions, you can't use the vouchers on deliveries. So again, if it was something that was on the universal credit, at least then they could use that to have the food delivered.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
mean, there's a bigger kind of societal problem, if you like, and that's one of social care. And we know that schools have been proxies for social care and child welfare for many years, and increasingly the case. So as soon as children aren't in the care of schools, I think some in society are much more vulnerable anyway, and that's that's something that's a broader conversation about, where does the responsibility for children's social welfare start and stop. So again, I think what I'm saying is that we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of children's social care needs in school and out. And it's exacerbated when we have these lockdown arrangements. I recognise that we're about 3 minutes away from the end of this podcast, and so I'll give you all the opportunity to just offer some final thoughts, if that's okay. So we'll start with Leslie.
I think it's a case really of doing what's best for your school with your staff and your children. I really do. But we do need some help and guidance on this.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Russell?
I think I'd echo it with that. I think, we're all work in schools because of children and trying to do the best for our children. And at the moment, we're failing our most vulnerable, and we shouldn't be.
Sarah?
I agree with both of those, and I think if we can't feed our children, we cannot teach them. And if we can't, the disadvantage gap that we've been working so hard to close over this last 10 years, I think is back to zero. Because those families, if number one, if they're hungry, they can't learn, and number two, they're less likely to have the kit they need to learn. And I really worry about what impact this is going to have in school when we do come back.
Thank you all. I think just from my perspective, I'm hearing loud and clear the problems that are out there. I think it's, as a sector leader, it's my responsibility to feed this back to decision makers. I think that we should reflect back on the last 7 weeks and recognise that things were far from perfect. But I would encourage ministers and officials not to give up on a solution that's going to work for the whole system. So, okay, things haven't gone perfectly. We recognise that. I think the sector will work with you, the department, if you come up with solutions which are going to respond to the needs of our education communities. And I think finally, it would be helpful, would it not, if decision makers and officials don't work in a silo, so they work and consult with frontline practitioners, because actually a lot of the solutions you already have them. So that's my homework. That's what I'll take away from this session. Thank you all for contributing to a very insightful conversation. Thanks again. Keep doing the great work that you're doing. Stay safe.